Welcome to the Dream Power Show, where your dreams turn into reality. Here is your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman.
Welcome to the Dream Power Show. I'm your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman, the Dream Coach. One of my favorite pastimes is looking at family photos. When I was a kid, I loved poring over the picture albums my mother kept stored in the bottom drawer of the buffet cabinet in our dining room. What fun it was trying to find the family resemblances. For instance, I saw that my grandfather had the same curly hair that I do, and my father's cousin looked a little bit like my older sister. I don't know what became of those old pictures, though I think one of my sisters has them hidden away in some storage closet. I have lots of new pictures to look at, those of my kids and grandchildren. My little granddaughter has dimples just like I do, but she has a bright shock of red hair that I think she got from my husband's side of the family. And even though my kids have their own distinctive looks, there are enough similarities between them to see that they're brother and sister. My point here is that we carry our outward characteristics from generation to generation. Did you also realize that we do the same with our internal behaviors? It's called emotional DNA, and the thoughts, feelings, and actions we inherit have a lot to do with how we relate to our families and others. My guest today, Judy Wilkins-Smith, has studied these patterns for years, and she's here to explain why we should pay more attention to them. Judy is a highly regarded organizational expert and the founder of System Dynamics for individuals and organizations. Welcome to the Dream Power Show, Judy.
Debbie, it's lovely to be with you today.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, Judy, did I explain emotional DNA correctly? Is it something we all carry inside us?
You explained it beautifully. Yes, absolutely. We don't just inherit our physical DNA, we inherit our emotional DNA. And it's exactly what you said. It's the patterns of thoughts, feelings, and actions that we carry with us that are passed down from generation to generation. And in fact, many studies now show that an event creates an imprint on the system that supersedes just the person it affects. It travels down for many generations. So we may wonder why we're angry or sad or fearful in a particular area of our lives. And this is why.
That is fascinating because, it's like, my son has the same blue eyes my husband has, but it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't matter. Nothing affects that. But it's interesting how, the emotions can be carried down and do this. So tell me, I mean, how does this happen? I mean, why does something that caused my great grandfather to be angry uh, trigger something in me that makes me angry?
So we're very, very faithful repositories of everything that happens in our systems. It looks a little bit like this. We have an event. The event creates an immediate reaction in the person who's affected, and they begin to make choices. So first there are thoughts, and then there are feelings, or the other way around. We're never too sure. But very quickly, we start to have this reaction to the event. And from that, we start to make language. Be very careful when you don't ever, make sure you never. And so what do we do with that? We then speak it into our world. So we're reinforcing it for ourselves, but we're also reinforcing it for a new generation. And they look at mom and dad and go, well, mom gets sad when, so this is how I fit in. And so they take that on too. Now, the interesting thing about systems is very often the events themselves will pass on remnants. So you will see elements of that repeating. An accident here can become an accident further down. And again, this is because we're saying, don't be careful, watch out. And systems are very elegant organisms. They keep trying to tell us what's happened in the system that's now become a limitation so we can do something with it. Because the beauty of what you said earlier, which was, I have red hair, I understand, or my grandson has red hair, I understand where it comes from, is this. With emotional DNA, it's stronger. It contains all the words, all the thoughts, all the feelings that came down, but with it, the entire potential for you to swing it around. And the minute you swing that around, that begins to swing the entire system. Now it's no longer thinking the same way. It's no longer feeling the same way. It's no longer acting the same way. And you can see that if you have generations where nobody's gone to college and somebody looks at the patterns in the system and goes, well, that's not working for me. I'm doing it differently. And the minute we get the thought of, I need to do it differently or something needs to change, we're into that clue box. Now, if we go back and look at what happened, we can also use it as a fuel to say, here's how I'm going to do it differently.
So, the things I said to my children when they were growing up really didn't necessarily come from me. It came from what I learned from my mother and what she learned from her mother, and so on and so on and so on. So I'm sure we don't realize we're doing this.
Not at all. It is deeply unconscious. People will say to me, but I didn't do that on purpose. No, but you very faithfully inherited all of those pieces and took them on as though they were yours, because that's what systems do. We keep everything humming along and then we adapt and change it. And of course, a system's greatest need is to survive, but its highest ideal is to grow. So it's always looking for that member who's going to switch it up a degree, switch it up a degree. And so that's what happens. You take a word that affects somebody in one way and go, oh, but this could also mean this. See, the other thing we need to know is that we tend to be a little more negative if you look at it that way. We know, here's the danger, watch out. You need to suffer. Good people are humble. So we tend towards that. We don't always remember that there is a flip side to that coin. And it's when we turn the coin over and go, oh, but anger can become love or passion. Sadness can become joy, that we start to turn things around. So they're both our limiters, but they're also our clues as to how to live a bigger, kinder life.
Okay. So how does one go about figuring out what her emotional DNA is?
So this is where I love the genealogy site. There, genealogy 1.0. Here's where I belong. Why this matters is it's genealogy 2.0. Why does that matter? So what you would do is you look at an issue that you have, something that's plagued you for years. And the questions you will ask yourself are, how does it affect me? When did it first show up? What was happening in my life? Is this similar to something that's happened to anyone else in my family before? If I'm excluded, who else was excluded? If I don't do well financially, who else didn't do well financially? Because we then know there is what we call a hidden loyalty to a pattern that hasn't been seen and resolved. So it's become a bit of an exclusion, and it's irritating because it wants to be seen so it can balance and you can move on. So you want to look for what irritates you, and then there are two ends. You want to look at what irritates or limits you, and then you want to go straight to the other side and go, so what do I really want? What is my heart's desire? Because that is your next step. This one that irritates you is actually pushing you to connect with the one that's going to fulfill a heart's desire. That's your true life.
So it is possible to make a break and make new DNA patterns that can then go on to subsequent generations.
It's not only possible, it's absolutely crucial. Every time you shift something, everything else in the system has to realign. It can no longer be the same. So the minute you create even a degree of change, you're affecting that system just a little, just a little, just a little, until eventually it flips. And sometimes if it's a really big pattern, you'll see that the whole piece flip very quickly. I was writing about this recently, and I was saying it literally takes a sentence, a couple of words. You can think about this, generations and generations or years and years, and somebody walks in and says, the war is over. One sentence. Women can vote. one sentence, it changes everything. But at first, it needed to be seen. Women can't vote, needed to be seen and given a place, because it was what would ignite the shift to say, women are seen, they may vote. So I always say to people, don't disrespect what's irritating you, love it and look at it. It is trying to push you forward to your next step in your best life.
So when you're talking about emotional DNA and basically we're really emphasizing the negative aspects because those are obviously the ones we want to change once
Right.
we become aware of them. But do we also inherit positive?
Absolutely. And those are the ones you want to strengthen, right? And it's interesting. Think about this. The negative ones we pass on as cautions. The positive ones we pass on as something as aspirations. You should be like your father. Your grandfather was incredible. We're actually telling our story all the time. And if we really pay attention, we can see where the difficulties are, and we can see where the aspirational pieces are. But we tend to lock into the difficulties.
Well, Judy, I always like to hear about examples of how this plays out in practice. So, do you have an example of how working with discovering emotional DNA helped somebody that you've dealt with?
Gosh, so many, so many. I mean, I'm blessed. I get to work with this every day. I had somebody who came in who I think will probably always stick with me. She came in, she was very, very quiet. She could hardly say two words. In fact, she didn't want to work in front of the group because she was embarrassed. And I said to her, what's the embarrassment? She said, I'm very unlovable in my family. And I said to her, okay, tell me about that. She said, well, my brother, my father, and my mother get on very, very well. They're very kind of clinical, cold people. And as a kid growing up, I only ever got very little drops of love, just little drops of love. And it's so embarrassing. I'd like to be close to them, but that's all I got. And I wish I was closer. And I wish I knew what to do. I don't know if I'm good enough. And I said to her, so you've grown up. Are you a mom? She said, yes. And I said, talk to me about being a mom. And she said, I'm a great mom. My kids love me. I do really well, but I don't with my family. And I said to her, hold on a minute. Let's look at your family. Well, it turns out her family came from Germany during the time when it was Holocaust and we had all of those things happening. And for her family, there was very little joy. In fact, it was, we survived, we should be grateful, the end. She was what you call a much later child. So she was born long after that. And so she comes in almost as a new generation, right? And here's this little bubble and she's looking for joy and all she gets is these teeny tiny little drops of love. And she said, I don't even know how to connect to my family. And I said to her, actually, you do. And so we had a look and I said to her, look at this. Your family only had little drops of love to give, didn't they? Yes. And they gave that to you, didn't they? Yes. What did you do with it? She said, I grew lots of love. I said, yeah. You did what they couldn't. They gave you what they could. Now you're doing what you can with what they gave you. Do you understand that you were the next step and the legacy of joy that was looking to emerge? I think she probably cried for about an hour and she walked out going, I got it. This is how I connect. I'm the next step. It's fine. They gave me what they could. When we know that our parents have given us what they can, even if it's just life, and we take it exactly the way that it's been given to us, we now have the opportunity to turn it into something incredible.
How
Sure.
can people find out more about you and your work?
Okay, so a number of ways. My website is Judy Wilkins-Smith.com. And then they can look me up on Instagram and Facebook.
We've been speaking with family patterns expert Judy Wilkins-Smith. We'll be right back with our next guest. What do you think of when you hear the word ritual? A church service, perhaps, or holiday celebrations? or maybe even Sunday dinner with the family. We can all think of various rituals we have in our lives. Some we do with great enthusiasm, and some we might perform because we're forced to by others. But did you know that you can create rituals to achieve your dream life? Rachel S. Heslin believes that rituals can help us achieve clarity and make us more productive. She's the author of the book Navigating Life: 8 Different Strategies to Guide Your Way. And she talks about the importance of rituals in her book, Rituals of Release: How to Make Room for Your New Life. Welcome to the Dream Power Show, Rachel.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, it is my pleasure. And I really want to get into this whole topic of rituals. But let's start with a clear definition. What do you mean by rituals?
When I use the phrase rituals, I refer to a very distinct container that you create to have a certain purpose. I believe there are 4 elements to creating a ritual. The first one is to create a sacred space. And it can be either a physical location, but it could also be a space in time or even a space in your heart. But it is something that you set aside specifically for this purpose. The second element is to set an intention. When you come out of the ritual, what will you want to have accomplished? The third is some sort of action, a physical activity that helps you embody the intention so that you can bring it more clearly into place. And the fourth element that closes out the ritual is the closure. You want to close the container so that you can transfer yourself from this sacred space where you are creating something and move into your day-to-day life. And having this block of time, space, intention, and action can bring that additional clarity and focus so that as you move into your new life, you can do more things because part of you will have shifted because of the ritual.
Hmm. So let's go into a bit more detail about how doing a ritual can help you improve your life.
The biggest part is getting rid of all of the stuff around you, even for that temporary time. We are bombarded by so much information, so many things that we need to do, so many ideas constantly being pulled in all of these directions. By creating that container, you can give yourself permission to let go of everything else so you can focus and truly embody and become connected with what's inside you, what's actually going on, so that you can listen, so that you can feel, so that you can experience outside of all of the chaos on a deeper level so that it has a greater impact.
Hmm. Okay, so let's dive deeper into the elements of a ritual. So you say the first one is having a sacred space. Uh, do you is this space something that is like just totally dedicated to one ritual, or can you use it for many rituals, or how does that work?
It depends on the person and the purpose. Several people find it useful to create a physical space that contains physical objects that help trigger their connection with something larger than themselves, with timelessness, with something sacred. And having that place helps activate who they need to be in that moment to perform any number of different types of rituals. At the same time, it's also possible to have different spaces for different types of things. I have mentioned that, or actually, you had mentioned about how rituals can help you be more productive and more successful. You can turn your office space into a sacred space by closing off the outside influences and saying, this is my space, this is my time. You can set aside a certain block of time for rituals. And then you have a time container in which all you focus on is what you're doing in that moment. So it can shift depending on your like I said, the person and the purpose.
Mm. Well, I know that a lot of times when we start to, create a new habit or a ritual, like you say, it's easy to get distracted. Something can trigger you, and you're off, and you're just out of it. So, how do you keep yourself focused to keep this ritual and have it become something that is a important part of your life?
Practice. It's a matter of practice, intention, and understanding how it supports your life as a whole. If you go in with the mindset, this is something that I should do, it's probably not going to stick because you're not embodying the intention of transformation. Rituals are designed to help you change, to help you clear out what's getting in the way of what you truly want. And when you connect with what you truly want and you see, oh, this is something that supports me, you can create routines that incorporate the rituals. Because let's face it, we're not always going to feel like doing it. But if you come back to this is something that supports my larger vision, it's easier to build the motivation to do it. And when you're not really feeling like it, you can go into it saying, okay, but this is something which will move me closer to being who I want to be and living the life I want to live.
Okay, so you also say one of the steps is creating an intention. And I know in dream work, when we do a dream incubation, we set an intention on, a specific dream we may want to have. Uh, that has to be effective, it has to be very specific. So when you create your intention for the ritual, how specific does it have to be?
Sometimes when you're seeking something like clarity, you may not know the results. Sometimes the intention is simply to uh, develop the habit of having intentions. Having said that, I do agree that the stronger and more precise an intention you have, the more effective the ritual will be because it activates certain aspects of your reticular activating system and the subconscious to say, this is the journey we want to go on. This is how we want to come out on the other side. And when you have that intention, that opens up possibilities for what the ritual itself might require in order to manifest that intention. So yes, it is helpful to know what it is you want. But I don't think that not knowing what you want should stop you from the attempt.
So let's say, for instance, you just have this feeling like I'm not feeling good about myself and I want to feel more confident. Could that be created into a ritual?
Yes, my basic premise is love conquers all. So if I'm in one of my places where I'm just not feeling confident, the way I would go into a ritual is an intention of sending myself love, where, just to give an example, I will set aside a time to write a letter to those parts of myself that are feeling insecure and just let them know that they are loved, they are lovable, they are not alone, and it's okay. And that can be a ritual in and of itself of setting aside that space, having the intention to feel more confident and better about myself, writing out that letter to myself, and then setting aside the letter, and then closing out with gratitude and breathing before moving back into the outside world.
Rachel, you say that one of the uh, benefits of doing a ritual is getting a release. So, can you go into what a release means in terms of these rituals?
Something that I am personally very interested in is the way that we take on other people's stuff. We all know about those type of uh, shoulds where people ask us to do something. It's like, well, I don't know, you have a choice, yes or no. But we also have to be careful about the things that we take on without knowing it, which are the what I call hidden shoulds, values, goals, things that aren't really ours. Having a ritual to determine what isn't really ours to do can help us let go of the flotsam and jetsam that are getting in the way of our true contribution. Now, I make a strong distinction between release versus rejection. The problem with the concept of rejection is it's a pushing away and it is a condemnation. And the reason it's a problem is because something that may not really be good for you may be perfect for somebody else. In addition, something that doesn't work for you right now in this moment may have been really good in the past, or maybe something that you'll want to pursue in the future. So we don't want to reject it or label it as bad, but rather release it, let go of it from our present moment so that we can be more clearly focused on what is before us right now.
How can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, my company is the fullness of your power. I love helping people embrace their true selves so that they can live happier, more successful, and more deeply fulfilling lives. My website has several resources. It's thefullnessofyourpower.com, and you can reach me through there. And I'd love to hear from you.
We've been speaking with Rachel S. Heslin all about rituals. We'll be right back with our next guest. Sometime around late 1300s, tarot cards were created. At first, they were used for games and amusement among the aristocratic set in Europe. Then, during subsequent centuries, they took on a deeper meaning as a way to divine the future. We're going to take a look at how tarot is used today with my special guest, author and tarot expert, Sasha Graham. Sasha has used her interest in tarot to write several books, including Llewellyn's complete book of the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, and her own tarot decks, including her new one, the Dark Wood Tarot. Welcome to the Dream Power Show, Sasha.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. I'm so excited to be talking to you about tarot and actually be asking you the very simple question, why should I be interested in tarot?
Well, I think tarot is one of the most fun things and one of the most versatile things you could ever kind of have. You know, it's an innately magical device. I always call tarot the gateway to the metaphysical arts because you can use it for so many different things, like straight up divination. You can apply it to astrology, Kabbalah, numerology, color work, dream work, shadow work. It's really like this marvelous device that acts like a mirror for who you are, and you can pretty much use it for just about anything you want.
Isn't it wonderful that cards can do so much for a person? But I just have a very curious question because all tarot decks include the same number of cards, the same card names. Why are there so many different decks?
Well, first, I want to say that the reason that every tarot deck has the same innate structure, which is the four suits and then a major arcana, so the minor arcana and the major arcana, this is really what separates a tarot deck from an oracle deck. And there really is a difference between the two when you really start working with it. It's the structure of a tarot deck that allows all of these other kind of modalities to be laid on top of it. So that's there for a very specific reason. It's very concise. And that's not to say that oracle decks can't, of course, be used as well. It's a different system. It's a different kind of animal. I think you can go a lot deeper in a lot of different ways with the tarot. But the reason there's so many different decks out there and continue to be, because we've seen such an explosion, especially in the last decade. I mean, pick a topic, a subject, an aesthetic, and you will find a tarot deck, right? It's because you can really lay anything you want on top of it. You know, it has this kind of mythic structure and so, you know, like any good story, the elements are all there. You lay what you want on top of it. And it's really phenomenal because as a beginning reader, you want to find a deck that will keep bringing you back again and again. You want to be kind of seduced and beguiled. So there's really a tarot deck out there for everybody's taste. So we're quite fortunate to be living in a time with such variety.
So if you were, say, in a store and looking at a bunch of different decks, you pretty much go to the one that you just feel something about.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, your personal impulse and attraction to a particular deck of cards is always the first instinct that you want to follow. So, you know, and it's actually the same thing with reading of the cards. You know, what's that first thing that pulls your attention? That's even more important than what the card traditionally means. So you want to move towards what calls you toward a tarot deck the same way you want to go toward what calls you in your life in any circumstance, right? You want to be following that inner impulse. So you should definitely purchase a deck that seems really fascinating to you. And then if you really want to create sort of a solid practice, it's a wonderful idea to get the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, only because the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which came out in 1909, and that's the deck most people are familiar with, lays the groundwork for a lot of the symbolism you find in most decks today, which tend to be Rider-Waite clones, which is kind of building upon the symbolism you see in there. So yeah, the first thing you should get is the one that you're sort of like, wow, what is it? And sparks your imagination. And then to move deeper, you should get a copy of the Rider-Waite.
Yeah, so that would keep you interested
Mm-hmm.
and keep going. It's almost like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
feeling, that energy that comes from it.
Yeah, exactly. Because, you know, 78 cards can be overwhelming to learn, you know, and oftentimes your appetite and kind of haste and excitement to read can become overwhelmed by all of these things to memorize. So when you have a deck that just keeps drawing you back again and again, I think that's really a game changer in terms of like diving deep into the tarot, because it really becomes it does become like a dreamscape in which you move into every single day. And so you want that to be filled with the things that kind of set your imagination on fire. Yeah.
Why are some of the cards called the major arcana and the minor arcana? Does it mean they're more important than other cards?
So what's really interesting, when tarot first was out and around, and you were talking earlier about how it came out in the 14th, or the oldest deck goes back to the 14th century, and even older than that, because there's actually a Spanish philosopher who was living in Majorca who was talking about tarot as far back as 1200. So it's a really ancient set of cards. And so what we're talking about when we're looking at the major and the minor arcana is a visual language. So we have to remember that back then, this is pre-printing press, books were not available. The general public was not literate, so the way that the church communicated was visually. So when you look back at these older decks, the Visconti deck, the Marseille deck, what you're really looking at is archetypal imagery that the churches, European churches, use to communicate their ideas. And so that's what you find in the major arcana. The major arcana are these big kind of essential otherworldly ideas, like the lover, the star, the sun, the moon, the world, right? Which is kind of this nirvana kind of heaven that we can all kind of aspire to. So these can be considered our soul cards when they turn up in our readings, these major life points, these big milestones that we really want to pay attention to. But that being said, the minor arcana, which pretty much aligns with the regular suit of playing cards, really speaks more to our day-to-day things that we do, like here and there. So I always say something in the minor arcana, like the 5 of Cups, might indicate you being stood up for your date, for this guy that you're, and he stands you up. That's like a 5 of Cups issue. But the Tower card represents the last time someone stands you up for a date, because you just won't have that anymore, right? So that's major as opposed to a minor issue.
Okay, so now you have a deck in front of you. How do you use the deck to do a reading?
So it depends. So tarot is entirely dependent on who you are and how you're using it. And that's true of when you go and get readings as well, because you really wind up getting more of the personality of the reader, which is just a good thing to keep in mind when you're shopping around for a good tarot reading. But how you do a reading, well, you have to decide. Really, that's the first place for you as a reader. You're going to say, okay, am I going to utilize this reading to look into the future in a predictive, divinatory way, which is traditionally the way that tarot has been understood? Or am I going to do this reading to kind of look at my options and say, okay, this is where things are. What can I do to get X, Y, and Z? So when you're sitting down with your tarot cards, you're in the driver's seat. You get to decide what kind of a reading you're going to do. And then all of your questions and then information springs from that source.
So when you do a reading, do you ask a question first and then seek to get the answer?
Yeah, so if you're reading cards for yourself, I think for anybody who wants to use a deck of cards, and this applies for oracle cards as well as tarot cards, one of the greatest things you can do is just sit down in the morning, kind of clear your mind, and ask a question. Ask a question, something as simple as, what do I need to know today? Or what should I look for today? Or what's going to help me have the best day possible? This is such a beautiful thing, right? Because it just sets you, it clears your mind first thing in the morning, and it kind of broadens your horizon. And then you sit there sort of with a couple space, a little bit of breath, and then you flip a card and see what information comes to you. So it's really helpful to ask a question. Now, if you're reading for another person, then it becomes really fun, because you can ask them or help them form a question if they have one. And a lot of times, if you're practicing, your friends will definitely have romance, family questions. But it can also be so much fun to lay out the cards and just tell the person what you see. And then find out how they resonate with what it is that you see. So you can use a question, or you don't have to use a question. And you can also pull cards just to kind of take the temperature of the energy of your day. So there's a lot of different ways you can go.
And I understand it's also a difference between whether the card is right side up or upside down, has a different meaning. So,
Right. So when a card appears upside down, that's considered a reversal. And again, just sort of when you're starting out, it's up to you as the reader to decide whether or not you're going to use a reversal. So if you're first beginning, like if you're already trying to like memorize 78 different meanings of the cards, if you add reversals in, that might just make your head explode. So like, go slow, go easy. In fact, if you're just starting out, just reading with the major arcana is a great idea, and add cards as you go. The most important thing is to stay open, because fear of being like stupid kind of shuts down a reading for yourself. So reversals, if you choose to work with them, you can decide if it's going to affect the meaning of the card. You can choose not to read, and I often do not use the reversed meaning. But if you decide to work with a reversal, it can mean the opposite of a card's meaning. It can indicate a blockage of that card's energy. But then that's wonderful, because if you get a reversed card and it signals a blockage in your energy, you can choose to turn it right side up as a magical act, sort of as opening up that energy. So it's a first step towards releasing that energy. You can use reversals in a multi-card spread that become part of the pattern. And so that's interesting. Numbers and reversals can really indicate the flow of the narrative and the story that comes through a large spread. And reversals can also, depending on the deck you're using, can become a part of the visual that you have your own interpretation for. So really sky's the limit, but it pays to be really kind of open and just decide ahead of time what the reversal is going to mean for you. It's better not to decide after you're in the reading, if that makes sense.
okay. Well, I always like to see examples so my listeners can get a taste of how something works in practice. So
Okay.
for tarot, can you give me an example of how a reading had an effect on either you or one of your clients?
The most extraordinary things that happens when you really move into an active tarot practice, which means that you are reading for yourself or others on a regular basis, is that you start to understand your own intuition and psychic ability. And what's interesting about that is that the trust in the cards spills out into your trust into all of your other decisions that you make. So I can give you an example of a moment when I was really excited about something and I was hoping it was all going to work out. And it was like this complicated thing where a lot of stuff had to fall into place. And I can remember pulling cards without attachment, without emotional attachment to the outcome. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that what I was aiming for was going to happen. And not only that it was going to happen, but that it was the right thing. If we want to talk about readings I've done for another person, sometimes as a tarot reader, one of the best things you can do is step back and just let the information flow through like a channel. And I recently was doing a reading for a dear friend of mine who was having all this information came through about her grandfather. And it was really about the ancestor work of behavior she was engaging in, feelings she was having that were not at all hers. This was inherited stuff from her grandfather, and it had to do a lot with darkness and self-harm and negativity. And I could just see by the cards, and I just knew that it wasn't her. It was like an inherited PTSD. And using the cards, kind of this like a recipe came up for what she needed to do in order to kind of regenerate that energy. So it wound up, just based on the cards that came up, that she needed to do a ritual outside and kind of open the ground with a knife and put in like a divining rod to let the energy move from him back into the earth so that it could be regenerated. And after she performed that, she just talks about the greater ease with which she's greeting her daily life. So yeah, that's a really good example of, and that's also a really good reminder. Sometimes
How can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, they can go to my website at sashagraham.com. They can also find me on Instagram. I'm very active on Instagram at Sasha Tarot Diva. I'm a Llewellyn author, so you can find me on the Llewellyn website. I'm also a Lo Scarabeo author, although they don't list their authors. And you can find me on Facebook, Sasha Graham 1 on Facebook. And if you go to my website, sashagraham.com, you can also sign up for my newsletter, and then you'll always be alerted to special classes or new books coming out. I have a new book coming out, The Magic of Tarot, at the end of this year.
We've been speaking with tarot deck expert Sasha Graham. We'll be right back with our next guest. How are you feeling today? If you're honest and you say you're feeling some degree of anxiety, well, guess what? You're not alone. This has been a year that would test the emotions of even the most level headed person. From the pandemic to the election to the series of natural disasters that befell large swaths of the country, we've all been shaken with all kinds of emotions, from concern to worry to fear. And while situational anxiety is normal and understandable, when it becomes a daily component of your life, it's time to face it and deal with it. And that's what my guest today does. Joanne Williams is a licensed mental health professional who specializes in helping her clients shift their focus away from anxiety and toward more productive lives, sometimes with an emotional support animal by their side. Welcome to the Dream Power Show, Joanne.
Thank you, Debbie. That was good. It is so true. So thanks for having me.
Oh, good. Well, Joanne, is it normal to feel anxious?
It is one of the emotions that we feel as I educate children. I call them four main emotions or feelings: happy, sad, mad, or scared. And so anxiety would be in the scared part. And when you've got so many things being thrown at you right now, absolutely, it makes you think twice. You maybe don't have to go into fear, but anxiety can be part of your process to get prepared for it.
Okay, well, you mentioned fear. So, what is the difference between anxiety and fear?
Mhm. Right. Well, I think they're levels or a spectrum. If we wanted to look at terrified, would be kind of the extreme, but fear is right there. But fear is really made when we were more primitive and the tiger was advancing. That was fear, truly based to survive. Now, if you go up the spectrum a little bit further, is anxiety about everyday life situations we all do experience. So, anxiety to me needs to be managed. It is not something that is ever going to completely go out of your life, and you don't want it to, because what it's helping you do is look at a situation, stop and assess, be aware, make a plan. Then you can move forward. Again, I think with both emotions and logic. So that to me is the most productive way to handle anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, when I'm dealing with clients, who have fears, all kinds of fears, and I say that, fear is one of those primitive emotions. It was so we would be able to keep ourselves safe. But then you have to ask yourself, am I feeling a fear that is actually harmful to me? I'm threatened by something that is harmful, or is it maybe I'm making up that it's harmful and it really isn't as bad as I'm making it up to be? And that is so true. That's the question we have to keep asking ourselves. But tell me, Joanne, what are some of the signs that anxiety is getting out of control?
Another distinction I'd like to make even before we go to kind of how to manage it, the way that I see it is that our brain, with our brain development, our emotional brain developed before our cognitive brain. And our cognitive, ability to think through, analyze, didn't even start till we're 12 years old. So a lot of these anxieties or even fears, and it could be a trauma that caused this fear when we were younger, it can get stuck in the emotional brain and we can't process it out because we're still feeling it like we're a little kid that couldn't think logically how to get it out of our brain. And that's where a lot of times professional help needs to come in, or even with you looking at this dream, because you would be able to also kind of look at this situation. How are they looking at, what vantage point or perspective are they coming from? And that sometimes will even give the person or our listeners or viewers a way to look at this for themselves. Like you were just saying, a look at it. Be aware right now. Stop, think, what is going on? And if you can hear almost a little kid having a tantrum, I don't know what to do. Help me. I'm helpless. Those probably are something that started way back when that really needs some deeper look at them to be able to move forward to manage them. But one of the biggest things I see with my clients as I help them to move through this anxiety is their focus, and their awareness will help them look at, what am I looking at, what am I thinking about right now that's getting me in. I always call it a never ending loop of anxiety. It's the stuck, I can't get out of it because I think a lot of times if people really look at it, they think they're going to die, and that's fear. That's that reaction of the post-traumatic stress effect from prior trauma that gets stuck because they are thinking, even if this is not the tiger coming at them, they had an experience that they feared for their life. So it isn't as simple to look at if it's just about, I am questioning my abilities to go in to ask for a raise. They're very, very different, but both of them can have components of anxiety to them. So I think that awareness to me is the very first piece that somebody needs to look at and just sit with it a minute. And you'll hear it or you'll feel it, what this really is all about. Then you can take some time to learn, if you don't know, some skills on how to move forward through it.
Do you think that all anxiety is triggered by past traumas?
Necessarily. I don't go to that depth with it. I see that most fears, if they were that traumatic in their experience on that young mind or body, that there is a survival component, and but anxiety, again, to me, like number one is public speaking or getting up in front of somebody and kind of being out there. But that is rational. I'm not prepared. I better make sure I know what I'm talking about. Look at my competency level, my capabilities to do this. So there's an analytical piece. And then you get to the point, I can do this. But even when you approach that stage, you may still have anxiety with butterflies, or people talk about all the time for actors. They going on stage, they still have that stage fright, but they work through it because they move through it and just do it. And then they do it enough times that then they feel, okay, I have success. And success will always tamp down anxiety because you've got the experience to know you can do it with confidence. So that's always going to help anxiety. The fear, though, a lot of times we need experiences of success, but they can't get there because it's stuck in that emotional brain.
Well, yeah, you brought up something before, which is just talking about the awareness. Because I think most people just go through life totally oblivious to what they're doing or what they're feeling. And they'll have this anxious feeling and not choose to look into it, just say, well, this is the way it is, and this is how I'm feeling, and I can't do anything about it. But you're saying, no, you can do something about it.
Very good. Yes. It's skill based, I believe, just like math. You had to learn some things and do it enough times and practice it to be able to get a mastery of it. Anxiety or any emotion is the same kind of thing. But, the same with math. If you don't believe you can ever do it, you shut down, you can just feel the brain kind of, I can't do this, it's shut down. It's like you got a different issue there. And so you got to be able to hopefully check out which one it is so that you can learn some skills to move through it, or you need some help too. And it is hard. I'm not going to say it's not, because denial of the emotion or that awareness is a coping skill. It's not a very I shouldn't say that. It's maybe a lower functioning one. But for some people, it's very effective. They just go through their day like a little robot. They stay in their thinking side of their brain and don't get that emotional side of the brain involved. But there's a cost. They may not be emotionally available. They may not be in relationships. They may not have a job that really you relate very well to people. But hey, some people move through life in different ways. And I think if they're happy enough with it, it's all good. But I like awareness. I love growth. I am just like a growth junkie. I just can't do enough. Even just being on your show today, it excites me to try something new like this. I like trying things new, but fear will stop you, or even anxiety, if you don't have the belief or the possibility of the belief that you can do something, or the will and the tenacity to just wing it, try it, see what you can do. And it can kind of be a thrill if you really are willing to take some risks.
What are some of the other ways that anxiety affects our ability to live productive lives?
Boy, and that is such a big, wide question. And it's just affects it can be on every level, whether it's your physical level, that stress affects you physically at some point when it doesn't have an outlet. And even in your career, so your financially, it can affect you. And I was just thinking as you were just saying that, how when you tried that thing and you were so excited that you succeeded and you felt like you had an achievement, that builds on itself. Because like in your career, for instance, if you're willing to, step out again and say something in a meeting or something, and you get noticed, initially you might shrink a little bit back because, oh, wow, attention I'm not used to, especially if you have something like social anxiety. You don't like that kind of attention because you're afraid that you're going to say something and everybody's going to reject you. But you did it and they looked at you with respect. That gets you advancements. So taking even small steps or small risks, maybe it's with a friend in the coffee room, first, what do you think of this idea? If I say this in the meeting, will you back me up? Just again, finding a way to make a little bit of a plan so that you could take the step forward.
How can people find out more about you and your work?
Oh, right. Love to share. They can go to my website, which is anxietysimplified.net. You can find out more about emotional support animals there, or about techniques and ways to manage anxiety in resources. I've been really kind of putting a lot more resources, even for food or cheaper veterinary care, because of the economic issues going on in the country right now. So I've just really been putting a lot more resources. So there's a lot there that they can look at, and it's all for free.
We've been
Yeah.
speaking with therapist Joanne Williams all about anxiety. I hope you've enjoyed today's program. Until next time, this is Debbie Spector Weissman saying, sweet dreams, everybody.